Good afternoon, everyone. Just gonna adjust my systems here, making sure my microphone's working as well. Because I think last lecture I started without my microphone switched to an incorrect setting. So we're in Flexibility Week now, so I totally understand not a huge number of people watching this live. This also is a lecture that, if you look back through my YouTube channel, has been pre-recorded and broadcast several times already. But I still like to deliver it. I still like to deliver it in person anyway, because the weird thing about this one today is, yes, I know that not many people are here, but people are probably going to go back and look at this later. It's nearly the most important lecture in COMP1511. I talk a lot of stuff. I talk about a lot of stuff with like coding, a lot of stuff with like individual bits and pieces that are techniques that you might use all the way through a programming career. But this is the only lecture. It's not the only one now that I think about it. There's actually a couple of other lectures where I talk about things like problem solving, talk about things like debugging and stuff like that, which are going to actually, like, debugging's more than just, as you can tell, it's more than just how to solve problems in code. It turns into how to solve problems in general. So there are other lectures that talk about things that go beyond a simple computing career, but I feel like this lecture goes beyond computing and talks about what it means to really work with people in general, and it even gets beyond career itself. And I think a lot of the things I talk about here are actually pretty useful things for life in general as well. So it's funny, this talk, I think, the first time I gave it, it wasn't even official. It was me just sitting down with a bunch of students and talking, and then I realized that the advice I was giving was quite useful. So I thought I'd formalize that. And I think the first time I gave this talk for real, it was half an hour long, and they got longer and longer every time I did it. And so today, hopefully, all goes well. This is not going to be a 2-hour long talk, but I have so much to say about so many things here that I think will potentially come in handy. Matthew, as you're saying, yeah, there's only 6 people watching. Oh, there's 7 in my current thing, but don't worry about it. It's not something that has to be super important right now. It's even advice that doesn't have to be, it's not right now advice. Like, advice for right now is probably people talking on the forums, trying to get the last answer before the forums go down for the power shutdown and stuff like that. So in terms of just immediate need, I can understand that people have other things to prioritize at the moment. But in terms of long-term need, I think this one's quite interesting. So let's start talking about what it means to be a professional. It's not even just what it means for you to be a professional, but what kind of decisions you can make to help yourself as a professional. So this one's full of memes, by the way, so I'm just going to cover up Mr. Ferrell here. I'll just move my face out of the way. So these aren't the only things that I would say are necessary, but they're things that have come up again and again and again when I talk to friends who are now hiring graduates to work in their companies, friends who are managing groups of people, and also just like the experience I've gotten from myself of just managing things like student teams and working professionally and things. There are 4 things, and they're even kind of ordered in a sense. They're not precisely ordered, but these are 4 things that I think that are very useful for people to think about. If you're thinking about, I don't know, like I was gonna qualify that and say working in computing, but it's not even that. It's just working at all. These things are necessary in order to get what you need done, but also to make it so that you can actually be in a working environment you like being in. Because a lot of the time we don't realize how much effect we have on the working environment that happens around us. So the 4 things come up with, in conversations with people, and also my own experience. These aren't just the things that I think are important, these are the things that literally companies are hiring on, and it tends to be in this kind of order where the technical skills are maybe a hurdle you need to jump over to get work, but the people who are actually selected for a position will be on the other. So the four pillars, Mark's 4 pillars for professionalism. They're not just mine, but I collated them together into this talk. So the first one is communication. What we don't always realize is that communication between humans is incredibly important, and if you can't communicate with other people, it's going to make it very difficult to work with them. I think that at the base level that's entirely obvious, but at the more subtle level it's more difficult to figure out how to communicate well. And then like when you acknowledge that communication is an issue and it may be something you want to work on, how do you actually build up those skills? We'll talk about that a bit in a second. Teamwork. Teamwork is vitally important. I'll talk a little bit more about this when I get to the slide, but, you know, one of the things that makes it very, very weird about a university education, and I know this because I'm forced to do it, and I have to say it that way, I'm forced to make you work individually. And that's a matter of needing to give everyone marks and needing to give everyone really, really solid feedback on how they themselves are doing. But in reality, you're very rarely going to be working alone. I mean, even, you know, I was talking about programming and pair programming and stuff and how important that is. There may be situations where you will work, you know, an entire chunk of your career without ever having, you know, a code file that was only touched by one person. You'll rarely ever see that. Occasionally you will, but like, you know, those will be very, very rare circumstances or very specialized files, that kind of thing. So working with other people is super important. And it's more than just being able to, like, you know, do some pair programming or something like that. This comes into, like, how do you organize your teams? How do you actually make sure that your teams can survive in a group together? And how do you help your team? So even if your team's not perfect, every team's dysfunctional in some way or another. We know this because we could look at all of our families and go, this is like a team that gets thrown together, and it doesn't always get along, and it doesn't always do what it needs to do at the right time, but how can we smooth that process to try to make it work a little bit better? So that's the teamwork thing, and resilience is another thing. Now, resilience is kind of a keyword and kind of a buzzword, so I'm always like so about whether I should put this here as what this actually means. Resilience, because resilience is a skill that you can learn, which is about dealing with situations that are difficult. I guess that would be the easiest way to put it. It's nearly about dealing with situations that hurt you, and it's not really resilience exactly that I'm talking about here, but it's your ability to figure out how you can work in a way that is going to be okay for you. So work in a way that's not going to hurt yourself, work in a way that is going to allow you to manage situations. Very, very commonly, working as a professional, we're put into situations that we consider to be, I don't know, if I'm going to be polite about these situations, I would call them character building. And if I'm going to be more realistic about these situations, I'd call them someone has dropped us into an impossible situation and we're supposed to somehow make the best of it. And so those are things as well, when we talk about how do we sort those things out. I actually talked about that a bit in the problem solving lecture earlier as well. And then the fourth one is technical skills. Now, this is here because, yes, it's something. When you hire someone to do the job, then you expect that they can do the mechanical things that are doing the job. But I put technical skills fourth for a reason, because you're going to potentially get filtered on these, but only after someone has decided that they could work with you. So when we're talking about being hired, these two are very important. When you talk about what you want to do in work, this one's important. And then this one's the kind of so let me think about like these. The first two are going to take you from, say, 100 candidates going for a position down to the one that actually gets interviewed. And then this one might be the filter, I guess, that you actually can decide yourself whether you go for a job or not. And even then, not super important. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so let's go in and talk about a few of these. So the first one I have here is communication. This is quite funny because I think you've seen me use this meme before, but I just love this meme so much because it's these two guys getting into this massive argument. I've never actually seen the TV show that that this argument comes from, but I just love it so much because there's just so much yelling and finger pointing, and then the throwing the chair and the walking out and everything like that. And so I want to talk a little bit about communication. One of the things you're going to notice if you go on this kind of career path to be a computer programmer is you will be here at university for, I mean, if you're lucky, let's say 4 years, and if you're unlucky, you finish it in like 3 or 6 years or something like that. And I say unlucky if you finish it in 3, because if you finish your degree in 3 years, it means you squeezed out of something else in your life to get that done. So 4 years is actually pretty good. It's pretty chill. 6 years is like, hey, maybe you should have finished this before now, or you did honors or something like that. That's totally fine. 3 years is like, what else did you sacrifice to get here? But what's going to happen is by the time you finish becoming, you know, the hotshot programmer of your dreams, the thing where you look in the mirror and go, you're going to be a great programmer someday, and then when you get to the end of your degree, you might actually get to that. Even if you don't get to that, you're like, oh, I guess I'm okay. I'm a reasonable programmer. That's where I got to personally, where I was like, yeah, I'm good enough. I can probably go for a job with these skills. But there's a whole lot of stuff I don't understand, and I will just probably find my way around it. The more time you've spent working on that programming, on that technical stuff, abstract problem solving, all those kinds of things, the better you get at talking to a computer. Sometimes the more effort that you've put into that, the harder it is to turn around and say, okay, how do I talk to humans? You know, how do I step back and I say, how do I explain what I'm doing to someone who doesn't understand code at all? And it actually becomes super, super important, because when it comes down to it, you're going to be working with people who don't understand code. The whole purpose of writing code is so you can get a computer to do something to assist a human in some way, or to make sure a human doesn't have to do something. So you're doing something to support humans. So if you can't communicate what you're doing with humans, then it becomes very difficult to figure out whether what you're doing is actually going to support people or not. And so when we're going to be working on things like that, when we're going to be solving problems with people, we need to actually have a shared understanding of that. Let me see, I always forget whether I have another slide. Yes, I do have another slide with text on it about what I'm going to say here. So, if we're going to work on things together with people, we need to have the same understanding as other people. Having the same understanding means that we can talk to each other about these things. This often comes down to the idea that the person writing the code to solve the problem is not always going to be the person who has spent all the time trying to talk to the humans who need the code written, in a sense. So someone has gone to talk to people and said, we see you have a problem, we see you're working in an industry that doesn't usually use tech, you know, and like an example is, I'm thinking about, actually I've an example of an old friend who worked with the sports industry. And the first thing he ever did was he was just playing like local sports and stuff. And then he wrote a tournament manager for people there. He has an entire company now. He's like, I don't know, 12, 15 staff working under him and stuff, and going around Australia doing solutions for athletes and sports companies and stuff like that. So it's a super interesting thing where he was able to see from the human perspective that there were issues that needed to be solved. He was able to put a team together and say, okay, this is how we're going to solve these issues for these people. And that all is based on, you know, human communication. I talked to one of ages ago. It was one of the tech leads for Animal Logic, the film company. So they did stuff like The Great Gatsby, the Peter Rabbit films, Lego movies, all that kind of stuff. And when he was talking about hiring engineers to work on the back end for films and stuff, people asked him, what should we study to get into like film tech stuff? And he said, you should do an arts degree. You should definitely do English. You should do some kind of spoken performance things, and then when you can communicate that well, you should work on the technical skills necessary to actually do this. And I thought that was very, very interesting. I don't know if he was swinging too far in that direction, but he definitely knew that the most important thing you can get out of an engineer is to be able to communicate with them clearly about how to do things. So, I was talking about here, make sure I'm going through the points that I'm talking about. Shared understanding requires communication. So solving problems, we need to be able to understand humans to be able to solve human problems. And I was also talking about, yes, the risk is if all the things we're communicating with are machines, we may start to treat humans like machines. This isn't something that has to happen, by the way. This is not something that is inevitable. Like, people have this, I don't know, this, I think, quite harmful stereotype of programmers. Like, you look at things like TV shows like The Big Bang Theory and stuff like that. It's not even programmers. I think only one of them's a programmer. But they paint this kind of portrait of nerds, and it's like this, I don't know. I guess I should go and say it's a toxic stereotype of what people who work in technology and science are. You know, so it's like this looking in from the outside and saying all nerds are the same. They don't know how to communicate. They don't understand humans and stuff like that. And I think that's a real negative way of thinking about things, and it's not even remotely true. There's plenty of people who I know who have dedicated their lives to doing things with computers. And then in a social situation, when you're all hanging out together, that person who's apparently, the nerd who just hangs around the computers all day is like the life of the party. They're the one that lights up the room, and they're the one that people gravitate towards and stuff like that. So there's absolutely no reason why anyone should think that stereotype has to apply. You can be a great communicator. You can be someone who people really want to listen to, and you can be someone who, when you explain what you're doing, like you're doing all this technical stuff and you explain it, people go, that's really interesting. Like, I can fully get behind what you're doing there, and I can understand what you're doing. And it comes as like, it's a skill that takes time to learn, and it's a skill that you can develop as well. So even if you feel like you sit in that stereotype where you're like, oh, I am one of those nerds at the moment, I'm someone who can't get my ideas across in a way that humans can understand. You can learn, you can practice, you can learn, you can actually get these kinds of things. So the other thing, I guess, that I have said already is like communicating with non-programmers is something that's super important, because always somewhere along the line you're working with programmers and you're working on code, and you can all discuss the code as it is, like the conversations we can have in COMP1511 where it's like everybody knows about arrays now, so I can just go, we're going to use an array to solve this problem. But if someone doesn't know what arrays are, you can go, look, we have ways of collecting all of your information together, and then we can work on it in batches, and it's going to be much easier for us to do this. It's not going to be manual or anything like that. The computer will handle all this stuff for us. There's a simple way of just explaining something like that and giving people an idea about how you're going to help solve their problems. It can work really well. Practical advice about how to get communication skills. So I found out about this in a very interesting way. You may have heard of this thing called CSE review. And it's really funny because you look at it and you go, why does this even exist in the School of Computing? I'm actually one of the people that helped start CSE review. It was some friends of mine that said, let's put on a theatre show. And I said, you're mad, but I'm in. And it was like, I spent a good, I think it was 7 or 8 years of my life doing university reviews, because I did them as an undergrad student, and then I ended up coming back at some point and working at the uni again. So I just hopped back in and kept doing it, and doing all of that theatre gave me so much kind of time and experience communicating with people, and it was really useful. So it gave me a lot of skills, and like a lot of situations where you have to kind of stand up and deliver something, and you know that after it's left your mouth, you have no control over it anymore, especially in theatre where it just goes on. The show's a steamroller, and you have to keep going. And there are times you get stuck without your lines, and you have to just sort of improvise something. You forget things, and you're like, I've got to find a way around this. And that teaches you a lot about communication. So I say that, like, if you want some practical advice on how to pick up these skills, is put yourself in situations where you need to communicate. It doesn't have to be theater, which is like the pinnacle of difficulty, I guess, in human communication, where you're trying to convey an idea to people in an abstract sense. But you can do public speaking things. Actually, I think the pinnacle of difficulty is improvised comedy. I did a little bit of that, and that was so hard. One of the tutors actually was a stand-up comic, so in a previous life. So it's quite interesting seeing that. But yeah, there's things you can do like that. I'm trying to think of other ways we can learn about communication, even just doing a bunch of organized things. But you know what? I have an idea. I'm going to talk about that when we talk about teamwork, though. So I'm going to talk about teamwork first. I'm going to talk about other ways you can learn about teamwork. So, teamwork. And I say here, code is very rarely created alone. And there's a really, really interesting thing I want to say about teams. So, if I wanted to kind of take COMP1511 and turn it into a project course. So instead of the 2 assignments you have now, I give you, well, maybe just 2 assignments, but they're different. They're much harder. But I tell you have to put 4 people together to do it. There's a really interesting statistic. It's from a research study. I always forget to look this up and quote the actual study where this was done. But people put together a study on education, actually, and about putting groups together of students to do things. And so one way to do this is they decided, all right, this should be simple. We'll just take all the course marks that they're at the moment, or in university perspective. We'll take your WAMs and we'll just put teams together. So all the top WAMs are together, and then going down the list, we just rank everyone in terms of their academic capability, and we'll throw them together into teams, and that should be fine. We expect that the WAM going into the team is the same as the WAM coming out of the team. So teams with a lot of successful people will create a lot of successful stuff. And I mean, I don't even need to say there's a spoiler here, because it's pretty obvious that I've said it right here on the slide. It's not actually how it works. And it's really interesting that that's not how it works. Because what actually happens is it doesn't matter if some people in the team are technically more capable than other people. What really matters on the team is how well they get along. And that is based on a lot of important things. So I say here, teamwork is based on sharing and compromise. I love this meme. It's like Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers. I think this is a photo of the bit out of Predator, I think, or it's out of Rocky. I can't remember, but this funny like macho man movies of the early 90s. So one thing that became obvious, because I used to teach a lot of group work stuff. I started reorganizing groups and did surveys on potential group members to put them together into groups, and the questions became less and less about what you could do and more about what you wanted to get out of the project. So it's like when people aligned on what they want to achieve in terms of how much they care about what's going on and what do they want to get out of it. If you put groups together from people who want to get something out of it, if they want to get the same thing out of it, then they actually work a lot better. So instead of just organizing people on WAM, I could ask people, do you want to get really high marks, and do you not care what happens, but you just want to get really high marks? Just put all those people together, because they're going to treat the project the same way. They're going to be like, look, let's just go fast, and let's look at the marking criteria, and then just shoehorn everything we're doing into the marking criteria to maximize our marks. And if you have a group like that where 3 of the people are like that, and one of the people is like, I want to get some genuine understanding out of this subject. Like the people who are here now, probably not that, right? Because anyone who's like trying to maximize the amount of marks is probably just working on the assignment right now. But anyone who's like, no, I came here to get a really broad education and understanding, that's probably the people who are here right now. I need to put all those people in the same group as well. Because those people are going to say, look, we've now passed the assignment because we've gotten enough stuff done, or we're at a credit level in the assignment. Now let's choose what we want to explore, because there are things that we want to learn, we want to understand. And so that team is going to treat an assignment in a very different way. And if you put one of those people on the team where everyone's doing min-maxing for marks, they're either going to be unhappy and maybe wanting to leave the team, or the team is going to start attacking that person for not working hard enough because they're trying to explore and they're trying to do something different. And likewise, you're going to get people who say, look, I know I can see those people. I can see the people with the high wham. I can see the people that keep talking in the lecture and in the forums and stuff, and they seem to understand everything. They've got everything covered, but I don't. I really just want to get through this, and I want to pick up something. And I know it's important. I know it's part of my education, but I know I'm not that good at it yet. When you put those people together with people who are really good at stuff, like I have to accept responsibility at some point that I have stifled some people's careers by allowing something like that to happen, and it really sucks. And as an educator, it's really tough because we've got more than 900 students in COMP1511 at the moment, and I know for certain that what I'm doing is not enough for everyone. It may be enough for the majority, and maybe that means I'm doing okay. We can talk about this more. I am going to talk about this more later. It's what does job satisfaction mean? What does it mean to actually do enough in your job and to care about what you're doing and be okay with it? I always have to accept that I'm not doing enough for some students. And sometimes it's because of putting them near other students who, because in a team perspective they wouldn't fit together, that makes it harder for some students to be okay, because it's always much easier, I think, when you're in I reckon if you have a class of 25 people and you're the third or fourth smartest person in the class, that's always a very nice place to be, because there's people you can learn from, but you're confident that you're doing well at the same time. And I would love to be able to structure all the classes so that everyone felt like they were at that point, because it really, really doesn't matter what point in the class you're at. It matters how you feel about it and how you're pushing towards things that you're doing. I'm so off track here. I'm not even talking about teamwork anymore. But if you can put teams together so that everyone feels like that, then you're in a really good situation. Yeah, actually, I should click through because there's text here that I was going to talk about. So it's not just about the building of the team, which is just the first thing I was talking about, trying to put a team together that works well. Sometimes the team's already built, and then you need to figure out how you're going to slot into that team, learning the skills necessary to be able to work on a team. So, most important thing, reason why it's in the meme, sharing and compromise. The best teams, if you can't build them custom out of people with the same motives and the same goals and stuff like that, the best teams are the ones where those people who are ahead in some way than the other people do what they can to lift other people. Because long term, you're much better off spending your time helping someone else in your team get better than you are kind of ignoring them and letting them flounder and then doing good work on your own. If you lift the whole team becomes better. In the future, the whole team creates better stuff, because everything. So if you're one of the people who you've understood more than other people in your team, if you lift up the people who aren't understanding things and you get them to the point where they do, the team works better for you. Also, one of the greatest sources of job dissatisfaction is people having to work with people that are you will eventually like people more if they start pulling their weight. Most of the time, people don't like people because they go, they're getting paid the same amount as me and they're not doing anything useful. That kind of resentment carries through work everywhere. You're working a part-time job, you're just flipping burgers. There's always someone who just turns up late, never quite does the work and stuff like that. And you're always why are they getting the same rate per hour that I am? I'm up front, I'm getting burnt over the grill and I'm getting this stuff out and getting it working well, but I'm still getting paid the same as the person pretends to wash dishes up the back while they're checking their phone and stuff like that, So it's that kind of thing where if you could get that other person inspired to do things, then the whole team gets better and then you'll actually be happier with where you are. The other thing, though, is it's not just about knowing how to lead a team. It's even if you're officially in charge of a team, can you use other people's ideas? Can you actually step back and say, I shouldn't be leading right now? This is the compromise side of things. Do you know when you shouldn't be leading? Because a lot of people take it as this kind of thing where I must become the leader. You know, I must get this promotion. I must become manager, that kind of thing. But in a real team that works well, do you know how to step aside and say, this person knows this stuff really well? Hey, I heard you worked in this other company where you did this thing. Can you kind of show everyone else what's happening here? And then the whole team will benefit from it. So the whole thing about teamwork, and it's why I've got this thing here as well. It's why I picked this thing, because they're both like pulling on each other in this. They're like flexing and pulling on each other. But a lot of the things about being in a team is knowing when to let the other person pull, and then when to pull back again if you need to, that kind of thing. So can you work with someone else? Can you do their thing when it's better for the team? Or can you go, oh, I've got the expertise now, I need to put my hand up and say, look, I can help with this, you know? Can you let the team ebb and flow like that? That's actually very good for teamwork. I used to talk here about, can you follow someone else's style and structure? And so this is the kind of thing about having a style guide. And the style guide in 1511 is actually reasonably restrictive. It's not an open C style guide. There's actually features in C that professionals use all the time where we go, we're not using them in this course. Right. And so it's really interesting. And I always find that really interesting because there's always like questions and pushback I get from students about this. It's like, why can't we use this? Can we use this instead? And it's like, yes, if you really want to, you can use that thing, but have you understood the lesson? Because the lesson isn't necessarily about, oh, they're stopping us from working the way we want. The lesson is you are always going to get into a situation where it's not about you. You know, it's not about you and the way you want to work. It's about the way the team works. And then the team works in a particular way that works really well for them. Can you slot into that? Because the best programmers are the ones where it's not about, I know the best way to do things, and so if I turn up on a team, everyone has to now start doing it the way I do it. It's like they turn up on the team, and the team's like, man, that new programmer feels like they've been here for 6 months. You know, they've only been here for a week or two, and they feel like they've been part of this team for ages. And like, if you ever get that, that's like, I've done it. You know, I've got the teamwork thing down because I came in and I saw how the team worked. I saw what's successful about it, and I said, I can fit how I work to this. You know, so it's an interesting thing. So there's a lot of, you're going to find this all through COMP1511. There's a lot of subtle lessons that I throw in there that aren't what I'm teaching. It's not what's on the cover. It's not what's on the box that's actually the learning. There's a lot of it underneath. I mean, this entire lecture is the stuff that's not what's on the box. Because what's on the box in 1511, what you get from the handbook and the course outline is like, you will learn how to program. You will learn how to solve problems with programming. You will learn some engineering fundamental skills and stuff like that. And inside I sneak in this is actually how to actually be successful as a programmer, is to learn to work with people. So yeah, we talked about support for teammates as well, and getting along. So this is one of the interesting things, is like one of the first things that I love to do, more now in 2021, 2020 less so, but when you first put a team together, you try to do something social. So you try to have some reason to interact with people that's not your work. When you know people, you have less of you're less likely to just sort of judge people on their work output. Like, if you're only talking about people and their work output, then you're judging people like they're robots. But if you have a personal connection with people, so you've just gone out and had dinner with people. So like in work teams, when we do that, we put a team together for a task. The first thing we do is we go out, have dinner and drinks or something like that. Or depending on the work team and how it works, maybe you'll have a games night or something like that. And I think like that's me also playing into the stereotype that I said was toxic, is that a lot of computing people do play a bit of games. So, you know, I played Among Us with the tutors once. I thought that was pretty funny. I think one of the funniest things I did, where one of my tutors killed me twice, 2 games in a row in Among Us, and then I sent them a private message on our Slack saying, I will not be requiring your services anymore in the future for COMP1511. It was so funny. I had to tell the rest of the group about that afterwards, because it was just such a funny moment. Because then afterwards, the two of us were imposters together, and we were like, oh, good. I sent them another message going, yeah, murder team, let's go. I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then myself and that tutor just went around, and we won it really easily because I don't know, she's a very, very skilled murderer. I'm not going to name them now that I've said that they're a good murderer. But yeah, so interesting stuff like that. So a bit of practical advice: how do we get teamwork skills? And I think this one's there's one obvious part to it, and there's an unobvious part of it. The most obvious part of it is join a team. The least obvious part of it is, what do you do when you're in that team? So I have a funny kind of situation where, and this is quite funny because my partner is a manager, so she manages software teams. So she's one of those people who's like, there's 30 people working on a massive code base, and she can make sure that the code base hits the deadline. And you probably know this, it's hard enough as it is just working alone on an assignment and saying, like, imagine if I asked you, by the due date, tell me exactly how much of the assignment you'll have finished. That's a really difficult task, but people will genuinely ask you to do this. We might be asking you to do this for assignment too, because it's a valuable skill. So that's hard, and it's hard to know whether you'll hit the deadline and what features will be available in your program when you hit the deadline. Imagine trying to do that when your team has like 30 people in it. So this is a role. This is a very difficult role in computing and engineering. You can get into those situations. Oh, actually, so my partner says this, and she looks at me and she says, where did you pick up all these management skills you have? Because you have all of these skills, but you've never worked as, like, you know, at that level of management. And I said, World of Warcraft. Because that's where I learned a lot of that. I learned that if you need to hold a team of 20 or so volunteers basically together to complete a very difficult task that requires a great deal of preparation, it requires training, it requires expertise, it requires a bunch of people doing very different tasks at the same time. It's very, very synchronous, real time. Even the logistics of organizing to get everyone turning up at the same time every week, it was like, it's full on. And then we had to deal with, I had to deal with the whole gamut of things. I had to deal with like, you know, someone harassing someone else in the guild, groups of people leaving at the same time, because, you know, it's a group of friends. And so if they want to move on, if one of them wants to move on, the whole group goes together. How do you hire the right people? How do you kick the right people and stuff? How do you manage the guild's resources and stuff? It's so funny because it just seems like, you know, on the outside, it's like, oh, they just play this game. They're just wasting their time. You know, like, I did this for the last stint I did of this, because I've been in that game since it was a beta. So I have to be embarrassed about saying that, because it's one of the biggest time waster games in the world. But I also consider a significant portion of my time there to not have been wasted. So I was in a guild that was 2 nights a week, working on raiding. If you have the knowledge, you've been in the game, you'll know about that, but it's not that important. But I was organizing a group of about 20 people. I was the second in charge of the guild, and we had what was called the ahead of the curve achievement, which means that every piece of content that was released for the game, we completed it before the next piece of content was released. And so we consistently had that for 4 years straight, until it hit a point where we were all like, the guild leader was starting her PhD, so I was like, if you're starting your PhD, how much work am I gonna have to do for the guild? And she was like, and her partner was also one of the people running the guild, and between the three of us, we were like, we're getting a bit tired of this. There are other things we can do with our lives and stuff like that. And we're like, okay, let's put a full stop on this. Instead of letting it trail off, we'll put a full stop on this on the team. We'll say thank you to everyone on the team and say, okay, this is where it ends, but it's been great, you know. And so we had that kind of thing. But in those 4 years, I learned how to do some of the toughest things in in sort of team management, having to deal with conflict resolution when there was a split, having to choose the side, where it's like, these people are leaving, they want to start their own thing, and you get an invitation from both sides to stay on, and you're like, who do I go with? Is it the people I have personal connections with? Is it for the good of the people who don't get to make this decision? It's just really tough. And then other times it's like, this person has to go. They're an influence that is making other people not want to work for the team. And if you don't want to work for the team, then you don't really need to be on the team. You could be running solo in this kind of game anyway, and you'd be fine, right? And so it's like, how do we deal with this person? Do we talk to them and stuff? And it's like, how do you talk someone down when they don't like what you represent? All this kind of stuff. So interesting things like that, getting yourself on a team, and then I think something that can be really important if you want to learn teamwork is get yourself on a team where it's not going to hurt you and your life if things don't go right. So I think this is important to say. So if my World of Warcraft guild had fizzled, 2 years earlier than it did, so I don't think that would have affected my life negatively in any way. It would have sucked. Because I love the game, obviously. If I'm going to play it 2 nights a week for 4 years straight, I love the game. And that's only nights we get together. I was obviously in-game a lot more than that. So in a situation where that falling apart is not going to hurt me too badly, I can go into those situations, I can take up leadership positions in those situations, and I can make a lot of mistakes and things are still going to be okay. So, one of the best... I don't want to be responsible for destroying the student clubs at UNSW, but one of the best things you can do is to join student organizations and stuff like that and go for executive positions there. Because you know that you can make a lot of mistakes there, and most of the time it's not like you're not going to drive a company into the ground. You're not going to make it so that the people who are working for you in those executive positions are going to lose their livelihood, not be able to pay off their house, their kids aren't going to be able to go to school, that kind of thing, because those responsibilities will fall on you if you end up managing people in a workplace. So it's better off managing people where the worst thing that happens is the student society has a bit of a rough year. Or one of the things isn't quite done that well and you need to ask for help from other people. That's the limit of how bad it's going to be. I did this a lot with I learned how to do a whole lot of theatre stuff when I was a student. And the Theatre Society had so many shows running a year that I signed up for positions that I'd only seen other people do. And I just sort of learnt my way through them. And I learned a whole lot about teamwork like that because I worked in a lot of different teams, and once the show was finished the team didn't have to keep doing things, so it was like worked in teams, and some of them were like, we would not invite you back, and I was like, yeah, okay, all right, good, I didn't do that well, so I fully understand that, okay. And other teams where I'm just like, I'm not working with you anymore. So we had those situations, but it doesn't matter because you got a lot of learning out of it. And the show still happened. Some of them were better than others because some teams worked better than others. It just happens. So a lot of things that you can do. The university can teach you a lot more than what it teaches you in the subjects. So teamwork is something that you can learn through that. I learned most of it through gaming, but then you do want to do a little bit of face-to-face stuff as well, which 2020 not so much, but 2021 I reckon there's going to be a lot more stuff in Sydney at least that is happening face to face. I don't know where we're at the moment with COVID, but I know we've been, I think, are we bordering on 2 months without any community transfer of COVID? So no cases heard of in the community in Sydney of COVID. So it's getting to the point where we're starting to act like Sydney is a haven of sort of COVID eradication, and then the vaccine, when it rolls through, is going to really cement that fact, and then we'll be able to kind of, I guess I don't really want to call it business as usual because it's still there somewhere, but at least we'll be able to do things where you're actually interacting with people in person. I might actually get to lecture in front of an audience rather than just sitting in my own house and looking at a camera and pretending I'm interacting with humans like this. So yeah, that's some practical ways that we can pick up teamwork. Join a team somewhere, and try to push to maybe take on responsibility in that team. Don't necessarily take responsibility at the expense of other people, but opportunities will always arise, and you can say, look, they needed someone to take this job, and it's not a great job. It's something that just has to be done for the group. Maybe I should take that up because I'm going to learn something about working with a team. Yeah, Matthew's saying that moment when COVID keeps mutating and we stay in lockdown forever. Yeah, I kind of like, especially through a lot of 2020, COVID was like the C word. You just didn't want to say it because it felt like you were jinxing things if you talked about it. But I think that, like, you can tell because I think some of you are in face-to-face tutorials, which happened very rarely last year, and the first 2 terms that didn't happen at all. So we are obviously opening up campus a little bit more. So there's chances to do teamwork in a more human setting. Not that, like, you can't do it over, like, Zoom or something like that, but I think it's much more real when you're sitting around a table together discussing things. Okay, so moving on to resilience. Sometimes, actually, I'm just going to put this here. Sometimes I'm the dog. It used to be. I have more control over my job than I used to. I used to treat being a lecturer as I had to do. So, let me tell you my philosophy for my work and what I'm doing. So, there was a line that I said to myself which cemented why I was doing this job as a computer science lecturer. I said, I am prepared to be fired on behalf of my students. So, if I believe that the university policy or the way that the university is treating students is not something that I consider to be what I want for them or what I think is in their best interest, I'm prepared to go against the university in that regard. I haven't really needed to put that into effect. I'm given enough autonomy within the School of Computer Science that I can just do what I want to do. But I had a lot of situations where, because of that philosophy, because what I was doing was like, I am focused on my students more than anything else. When I have big classes like this one with 900 students, I started to really, really start focusing on the students, and I started doing this kind of thing. Like, oh wait, sorry. Cursor over here. This sort of thing, the 80-hour work week. And being a computer science lecturer became something I had to survive. So, a bit of early 2020, this was definitely happening, but I mean, like, you know, I had to redesign the whole course to go online while it was running, and that's not something that we usually plan to do. But even 2019, I would work sort of 7-day weeks, and occasionally, like 1 out of 4 7-day weeks, I'd take 1 day off or something like that. I've got my boundaries much better now, and I'm taking care of myself more, so I'm actually taking weekends this year. You're going to get into a situation, and this happens to all of us, where you want a job. And this was, for me, was like, because you're talking to someone who hasn't been lecturing that long. I've been lecturing at UNSW for 2.5 years now. Well, not even a half, 2 in this bit of this year. And I was teaching for 3 years before that. I've been tutoring at UNSW for, I don't know, looking at nearly 20 years. Total. So I've been around, I've been teaching a lot, but not this particular job. You're going to find this same thing when you get probably your first job. This holy grail that people talk about, students a lot, will talk about getting a job. Like, just the ability to be hired at all is something that is, you know, when you think about it, a lot of the time for a lot of people, it's the reason you're doing your degree at all. Not all companies are like this. Actually, not a huge number of companies are like this, but some companies know that. Some companies know that the thing that you want is a job. And so they will give you a job because they know that you want a job. And it'll be an incredibly shit job. So they will do this to you. They will go, hey, Why don't you work 80 hours a week? Why don't you give your entire life to this work and end up in a situation where you've given everything to this and you have nothing left, and it's so bad that you hate the job itself, but because at some point in the past it had been your dream to get a job, you still stay in it, and you have to just kind of treat it as survival rather than something that's fulfilling you, something that's always teaching you something new about what you're doing, and it's something that you care about the results that you're creating. And so a lot of the time we're going to get into those situations, and like I have to say to people, did you want that job? Or was there a different job that you wanted? Was there something else that was going to give you the fulfillment that you wanted out of this? And it doesn't have to be this one job, this first job you got, or at some point in your career you get the dream job, and then partway through you go, I don't actually like this. You know? I think it's a question we always need to ask ourselves is like, where am I at now? What am I doing? Does this align with the goals that I had for my life? You know, and if you don't have goals for your life, that's totally fine. Like a lot of the time people's goals for their lives, I just want to eventually be happy, you know? And it's like, I know that sounds really bleak, because it implies that you're not happy right now. There's got to be something in your life. Look for something in your life that's making you happy. But if your job makes you unhappy, like you dread going to work, and the work itself makes you unhappy and stuff, then you're in a situation where you need to survive your job. And then at that point, maybe you need to look for something else. And I know that's a really tough thing to say, because you're in a situation often where you can't afford to look for something else. You don't just magically have the resources saved up where you can just go without work for a couple of months or something like that while you're interviewing at different companies and things like that. You can't just stop paying rent for a month as well while you're doing this, or anything like that. And so it's a tough situation, but at the same time, when it comes down to it, no one's going to look after you as much as you. And if you don't look after yourself, that means no one's looking after you. So this idea of resilience, first off, comes to us in our own decision making. So it comes down to us to say, this is where I want to be in my life, and if these things aren't working for me, I need to find another way around it. And it's really difficult, because this can put you in a situation where you're between a rock and a hard place. You don't know where you're going to be or what you're going to do, and you don't know how to even, make the right decisions. And the other thing is, like, judging your own decisions, very, very difficult. And in hindsight, heaps of our decisions are going to look wrong when they looked perfect when we made them. But that's just because we get more information later about what actually happened. So the difficulty, I think, is you've got to be your own advocate. No one else is going to say, this is the thing that should have happened for you. You have to say, this is the thing that I want to happen for myself. And so it's difficult. And you're always going to end up in a position where you have something that is creating a great deal of dissatisfaction for you, but you still need to do something with it. And so this goes on to my next point, which is not even just about whether to stay or go in a workplace or something like that, which is a question you should ask yourself, because like when it comes down to it, especially in the computing industry, staying anywhere longer than about 3 or 4 years, people will look at you and just go, wow, that person is so loyal. They could have gotten a pay rise just by jumping to that other company. And so, like, heaps of people do that now. It's like 2 years jump, 2 years jump, and stuff. And every time they jump, they get like 20% more pay. And then afterwards, you just go, hey, how'd you pull that off? Why are you getting paid $300,000 a year? And it's like, oh, I just kept jumping between jobs. Like, what? I thought you're supposed to stay to get that money. I don't know. This isn't career advice, by the way. The career advice I'm giving you is to look for fulfillment in your job, not look for a whole lot of money. Because looking for a whole lot of money could put you in one of these. I had a friend who worked IT support for a bank, and so the bank obviously needed to keep their stuff running 24 hours. And so he was getting paid a whole lot of money to basically have a phone that would ring at any time, and he had to pick it up no matter when it rang. And it was like, okay, good money, but how many times has it rung, like right in the middle of something on the weekend, and you've had to pick it up? And he was like, yeah, more than I want. I won't stay in this job for that long. And it's like, yeah, fair enough. So yeah, sometimes you make the decisions for those things. But anyway, talking about impossible situations. So these aren't just impossible situations where it's like, I can't leave this job, but I can't continue working here. There's also impossible situations where I've gotten these before, where someone gives you work to do, and you say, okay, that's a big chunk of work. I think, myself and the team here, we can get this done in about 2 weeks. And you say to the person, all right, so do you have an idea when we need this? And they're like, the code's in production now. It's already been deployed. We need this yesterday. And you're like, no, come on, we can't start from that point. We can't just go from we needed this already and we've only just given it to you to do. And they're like, yeah, but there is no other way that we can frame this because this is the reality of the situation. We need this now. And it's like, right. And there's a part of you that throws in the towel at that point. So remember I was talking about problem solving? So what are we going to do with this problem? The first thing is panic. And then the next thing is like, okay, let's deal with this situation. So I learnt about this in the funniest place possible. I have a friend who we didn't realize, actually, we were studying software engineering. He's one of my lifelong friends now. He's like a manager at Atlassian now, something like that. We ran into each other at this pub. I don't know if anyone goes to pubs in North Sydney. It's kind of funny. Generally, the only people who go to pubs in North Sydney are people who live on the north side. There was a pub there called North Point. And this was years and years ago, so I doubt it still exists. But we used to call it No Point because it was the pub that we would go to when there was nothing happening, and but we wanted to get out of the house on like a Friday or a Saturday. So we're just gonna go there because there's no point. And so we'd go there and we would just sit around and we'd play pool. And I ran into my friend there because I was like, oh, What are you doing going out in North Sydney? Because North Sydney is like the boring place to go out. Like if you're doing something interesting, you go into the city or something, But we ran into each other there, and we used to play a lot of pool. We realized we lived a few streets away from each other. We ended up really good friends because we'd just commute to and from uni all the time. But we'd play a lot of pool there. So I assume people know the game of pool. Like the stick hits the balls, and you try to sink the balls in the pockets, right? You don't need to know that much about the game. But there's always times in that game where you don't have what we call a clear shot, an idea of like where you want to hit the ball so that you can sink another ball. It's about hitting the balls against each other, and then the balls go in the pockets that are on the side. You can look it up if you don't know the game. But it's very much an Australian pub thing to play pool. I think it's an American thing as well. There's these pool tables in America and the UK as well, because like all our pubs are pretty similar. So we'd play pool, and you'd get into these situations where you just could not make a shot, right? There's other people's balls are in the way, or the angles and stuff just don't look like you can do anything with it. And there'd be different ways of reacting to that situation. So I'd see people who, in that situation, they would just hit the ball as hard as they could, and it would hit something and it would just disrupt the situation. I started taking on this interesting strategy where I would say, all right, I'm going to bounce the ball off the side there, and then it's going to hit that ball, and that ball's then going to hit my ball, which is then going to sink it. And if I said that out loud, people would be like, Mark, that's not going to happen. And it's like, yeah, I know it's not going to happen. But what I am doing is, in this impossible situation, I am planning an idea of what I want to do, and I am still taking action which is in my benefit. So, I don't have control of the situation. I'm in a very difficult situation, but I know I have control over some things, and at worst, I'm going to try to make things better for myself. I am not going to just smash the ball somewhere, because people would do that. We used to call it like the 6-pocket theory, where if you get enough of the balls moving around the table, there's so many points where they're going to bounce off the edges of the table that something will go in. Whether it's even yours, whether you're sinking your ball or your opponent's ball, you don't even know. So it's not a good theory. But yeah, instead of that, I was like, no, I'm going to make a plan, and I'm going to attempt to attempt to execute said plan. So I'm going to work for what I can do with what I can change. And what I didn't realize was that idea that I started doing, and I started doing it more and more, and I'd be in situations where like they're like 1% situations, but they'd come up, you know? Like, you can still do something like that. You can still get some benefit for yourself in a situation that initially looked impossible. And what I didn't realize in doing that was A, how many times those situations weren't impossible, and also how that completely changed my outlook in terms of problems in general. So I started not seeing any problem as insurmountable. I started seeing problems in other parts of my life that were situations where if I took some action to attempt to succeed at this thing, I could get some progress, you know? Or even if nothing else, even if I made no progress, I'd feel like I was doing something for myself, you know? I feel like I was doing something that was going to even make me feel better about what I was doing. So it was really interesting. And I realized that this is the lecture where I teach you all of the things that I learnt outside of class. So it's like, what have we got? I learned this thing in World of Warcraft. I learned this thing doing theater. I learned this thing drinking at the pub. Yeah. So I was a very good student at university. I obviously paid a lot of attention to my studies. But I learned a lot from doing that. And so one could nearly say that what I'm trying to tell you here is a lot of things that are actually going to give you the skills to deal with being a professional in the future can be learned from many different places. And it's nearly the idea that you should be taking on learning from everything that you do, not just from, oh, now I'm sitting down, Mark is talking, now the learning happens. You know, learning happens in all these other places as well. So that's the thing that I want to say is like, and that is the thing that people consider resilience a lot of the time. The ability for people to see an impossible situation and not panic, not react too irrationally. I mean, sometimes you want to react irrationally, like it's not totally irrationally, but emotionally. Still reacting emotionally to things is okay. It reminds you you're alive and you're a human. But being able to then deal with that situation and remain in a positive emotional outlook from an impossible situation is the skill that people tend to call resilience. So it's often, I think the way that like practical advice, the way I think about this is one phrase you can always ask yourself when you're in a situation that's difficult or appears to be an impossible situation. And the question is just what can I do here? And then you narrow your options to things that you are actually capable of doing and things that you're capable of making a change in. And you go, okay, now that I've got my options, I'm just going to pick the best of these, or what I consider to be the one that I want to do here. Instead of saying that the only way out of this situation. So someone's like, how do you get perfect education for your students? And I laughed because it was like, I know how to get perfect education for my students. I need to overhaul the entire university system. And I will teach 5 people a year. I think 5's about enough. Any more than that, and I can't give them my full attention. So I will take on 5 apprentices, and those apprentices I will make into computer scientists. And the computing industry is like, no, Mark, that is not how this works. The computing industry around the world says, we have several million unfilled positions where we need skilled people, so we need you to put skills into more people than 5. And me going, no, but as an educator, I need to know who they are. I can shape their attitudes. If I have only 5 people, I can teach all of this stuff really, really well. Because what I do is I don't say, go and find a team to work on. Like, we build the team ourselves, and we say, okay, these are the things we're gonna do. And yeah, so I think it's kind of, and also, I would hate to have this kind of thing where I'm teaching, and up until this point, I've taught thousands of people a year. So you could talk to, I think this, because now I'm in my 3rd year of teaching here, so anyone who is first to 3rd year in computing at UNSW has likely had me as a teacher. So what I've done is I've been able to teach a whole lot of people, and we're not necessarily turning people away. I would hate to be in a situation where I have to say, you have to go through some kind of trial to learn from me. You do anyway, like entry into UNSW is not easy. But making that even worse by saying, I'm only going to take a few students and they're going to be my apprentices, and then I'm going to only teach them. It feels really elitist and exclusive, even though if I was thinking about it only in educational terms, I'd be, those people get a great education, but that, if I want to look at it like that, and I say that is my impossible situation. So my impossible situation is I think that the best way to teach people is in very, very small groups where you know them really well, and there's no syllabus or anything. There's no curriculum that you have to walk through, and this week we do this, then this week we do this. You teach someone something, you see how well they understood it, and then you move on to the next subject if they understood it, and then the timing is based on the students. And I guarantee that anyone who went through that would learn better than anyone who's forced into the current 10-week term thing. Because the 10-week term thing is like, most of you are going to be okay with this. But I can't guarantee that everyone will be okay. So for me, that's like, the university puts me in this situation. And I understand why. Because we're trying to teach all the students who want to learn. And turning people away is a pretty horrible thing to do in education. And I mean, we're doing it. The system's doing it anyway, just because some people can't afford tertiary education. So, look, we've gone from wanting to change the university to now wanting to change the commercial setup of the entirety of Australia, which would then, by flow and effect, need to change the way that job and money markets are done for the entire world. So now I've hit an even bigger impossible situation by poking at that. So instead, what we do is we say, what can I do that is the best for my students, knowing that I am still going to teach hundreds of students at a time, because I don't want to turn people away. So how do I structure my content so that it still works for as many people as possible? That's why I keep saying things that are not part of the curriculum or the syllabus of the subject. They're not in the course outline. I say things like, I don't mind if you fail the subject, because if you pass it next time, then all you did was you took a subject that was twice as long, and then you saw it in more detail. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when you get somewhere. It just matters whether you get there eventually, and whether you're happy with how you got there. So, anyway, I've talked to ages now about the impossible situations. The other thing that's super interesting, and this is another thing about resilience, is the idea of failure. So we often think that, like, passing or failing something, this actually goes on to, like, what I was talking about failing a subject at university, is that avoidance of failure is actually one of the worst things that we can do. So if you spend your whole life trying to avoid failure, so let's say, I'm just very clumsy. Let's say it's obviously a theoretical example, because I couldn't possibly be clumsy. But so every time I go walking outside, I trip on something and I fall over and I hurt myself. And then I start to consider every time I fall over and hurt myself a failure. So I go, that was a failure of me being unable to walk properly, and so I'm considering that to be my failure. If I want to, I can avoid that failure. So I can say, I'm going to take actions to make sure that failure doesn't happen. So what I do is I lock my front door and I never leave my house again. Granted, nowadays, that's like kind of possible. Like, I've been working from home for a whole year now. But what it does is that mindset of avoiding the failure has taken away all my opportunities. So if I spend all of my time and my effort looking at the failure and trying to not make that failure happen, what I end up doing is basically a larger form of failure in a different way. I always laugh. It's like I used to do a bit of mountain biking, and also when you're doing snowboarding and skiing and things like that, is there's like a tree and you're trying not to hit the tree. So if you try really hard not to hit the tree, you look straight at the tree and then you end up aiming right at it. And then you go smack bang into the tree and you're like, ow, I hurt myself. Why did that happen? And it happened because you were focused on the failure. Whereas if you go, I know there's a tree there and there's the path I want to be on, and you focus on the path you want to be on, then you'll get there instead. So the thing that I want to say is, like, everything that we could conceive of as a failure. So there may be people here watching now or watching later who are unable to submit the assignment to the quality level that they want the assignment submitted as. So this is a perfect time to talk about this stuff because we're right in the middle of an assignment deadline, right? You may consider that a failure, but what I consider failure is it's an inevitable consequence of doing interesting things. If there was no risk of failure, if everything we're doing had no risk of failure, then it would be hardly worth doing. I don't think that you will live a life where you're happy and fulfilled with things if you always win and you always succeed. Actually, maybe you could. Winning all the time can be nice, but winning in situations where there was no chance for you to lose, it's pretty hollow. I don't know if anyone's ever cheated at a game or something, and like, or even just like you play a computer game and you use like a trainer or cheat codes or something and you're invincible. The game instantly becomes boring. There's no fulfillment in it because when there was no risk of losing, then there's no real winning. Not that you have to win all the time, by the way. Like, I shouldn't have framed that in a competitive sense. But what we get is situations where, for us to be fulfilled and stuff, for us to be working on things that we really care about, they have to have a chance of failure. And failure will be inevitable because the more times you do something that has a chance of failure, the more chance that eventually something's going to come up and you are going to fail. So we consider failure to be inevitable, and what's important is not whether or not you failed. So if you work towards avoidance of failure all of the time, what you end up with is kind of guaranteeing that you can't succeed, because the avoidance of failure means your focus is entirely on the failure, not on where you want it to be. So if you think not about whether or not you're going to fail, but you assume that the failure is somewhere in your future, and then the thing that's most important to you is not whether you can stave off the failure, it's not whether you can prevent the failure, but it's about how you're going to recover after the inevitable failure happens, then you're in a good mindset. So that kind of mindset is really, really good because it puts you in a situation where you say, there's going to be situations that we consider to be disadvantages to us, situations that we consider to be difficult or bad, but we really want to see them, because if we never see those situations, we're not really going to learn that much. Because every time you succeed, you don't know what happened to make you succeed. You know that something, because this is what I was like used to say to people who are making computer games, is like, if in training and stuff you make a really good game, you don't know why that happened. So it's like you roll the dice. So this is like a Dungeons and Dragons thing. Someone mentioned Dungeons and Dragons earlier in chat. If you roll a 20 on a 20-sided dice, it just succeeds at most things. And then you just go, okay, why did that happen? And you don't really know. Whereas when you're in a failure situation, you say, why did that happen? You can deconstruct the situation. You go, okay, this is why things didn't go well. And so now we've learned something and we're going to be better at what we do later. And so the way that we react to things when they don't go right is actually really useful. It gives us some more information about what we're doing, and it teaches us about things that is going to get us more able to get towards the things that we want to do in the future. I'm saying that really vaguely because it's just this is so general. Like, this could be a problem about like tying your shoelaces. This could be a problem about I don't know, learning to ride a bicycle, or a problem about like organizing your commute time so that you have enough sleep to make it through a lecture without falling asleep. You know, all of those kinds of things, they're real problems. They're real human problems. And there are times where you will fail. So I will stay up really late, either, like, you know, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if anyone else ever does this, where you just go on some kind of wiki. Like, there's some fun ones, like if you're a Star Wars fan, there's Wikipedia, and then you go down a rabbit hole on that, and then it's 4 a.m. and you're just like, I'm supposed to be working tomorrow. How am I going to make it through tomorrow's work when I do this? And it's like, okay, all right, we have encountered a failure. That's okay, we can still do something good tomorrow. We just know that we're not going to be that great. And then we think about how we're going to deal with this. That wasn't the best failure to think about. But I think the example that I was actually talking about earlier is failing a subject at university. And it's really funny because I was actually interviewed by the staff who run the UNSW Instagram account and the UNSW communications and stuff like that once. And they said, talk to us about failure. And I think at one point during the interview I said, everyone who's studying at UNSW should fail at least one subject once. Like, I'm not saying that we should make it so that you fail, but you should, because you're going to learn so much more about life if you fail one subject. You don't have to fail two. You don't have to keep going and failing lots, but if you're someone who usually passes everything, I don't know, don't necessarily do this on purpose, right? Because if you do it on purpose, it actually changes the experience. I failed a subject just on me not paying attention and going off and doing other things when I should have been focusing on the subject. Like, what I really should have done is dropped the subject when I knew that I was going to focus on other things, but I kept up a full-time load when I shouldn't have. But I learned so much from that. What that taught me was that I wasn't railroaded on a particular path. I didn't have to finish my engineering degree in exactly 4 years. Because the failure was like, oh, now that I failed something, if I extend my degree, then I'm going to underload for the rest of my degree. And I did that and my marks went up. And I was like, if I have enough time to focus on my subjects, my marks go up. That's an interesting thing. So if I want to, I can make my university education take a year longer, which I'm probably not going to, and now I don't notice that at all. So myself and all my friends all started at the same time. That's how we knew each other, like, because we all started our degrees at the same time. We all finished at different times. And by then it didn't really matter. And now it matters nothing at all. But what I have now is I have a different level of honors from my engineering degree than I would have had otherwise, because I barely scraped through into the bracket that I was in the end. And it was like, oh, okay. There's ways to game this system. That isn't just gaming this system, it's actually making my life more comfortable. Because I'm very hobby focused in my life, so like I like to do other things. And so that's that gave me the opportunity to spend my time on other things. Like, what was I doing? I was playing music, and I was doing a lot of rock climbing and stuff like that when I was at uni. Anyway, so people are saying some stuff there. Oh, someone's asking something about the assignment. Sasha is asking about how to get your code back from the auto tests and give. If you go to your student page on the website, on the 1511 website, you go to your student page. I think it's one of the things on the menu on the side. You can get your past submissions and stuff like that from there. So, I mean, like, I should at least help people with 1511 while I'm here. Oh, someone else is answering that already. Yes, you have. You have 2 hours, 1.5 hours left to grab it back before the servers go down for 24 hours. You still have Sunday to work on it after that, but, you know, everything's going down. Like, I'm not even sure if we'll be able to receive emails on our email address in that time. So, yeah. So you've got time. You can do it now while I'm talking. You don't need to be looking at the slides while I'm talking here. Like, a lot of the stuff is just me talking. So, we're talking about failure, and we're talking about failure recovery. You'll notice that a lot of the big successful tech companies do this. So when people create something that causes a problem in something like Google, and I know this is particularly being talked about as a Google thing that they do, is that no one is punished for these things, but instead what we do is we all go back and look over it and we say, oh, this is great, because yes, there's an error here, and yes, it's causing a problem for users, whatever. That's not really the thing, but what we're going to get is we're all going to know something. We're all going to learn a whole lot out of this. So the whole team gets together and looks at it and goes, okay, how did this happen? But not, how did this happen? This is like, okay, let's look at what actually happened here. And it's like, sure, someone did something that caused a problem. Who cares? It's not a blame thing. It's not a problem. But what we can do is we can look through here and say, that's really handy. Because if that person had never made this little mistake here, we would have never seen that we had structured our code to allow that mistake to happen and allow that mistake to get beyond our code and cause problems for other people. So that person gets like a reward for that, in a sense. It's like making mistakes and finding out things and stuff is actually highly encouraged. And that's the advice I have for you as well, is making a great deal of mistakes and learning from them is much better than trying to avoid making mistakes. So this is why whenever someone asks me, what happens if we do this in code? I say to people, what did happen when you did that in code? I mean, most of the time when people ask me that, it's because we're mid-flight in a lecture, so they haven't had time to try these things, right? They're going to try it later. But in general, when you're thinking about things, you're like, what happens when we do that? You go type it in. Type it in and run it. See what happens. Again, this is something I think I've spoken about before, that when I was learning about painting, I had someone teaching me about painting who said, what are you afraid of? The paint can't hurt you. Just put it on. You know, and it'd be like, but what if that's the wrong color? What if it's in the wrong places? And it was just like, don't care. Just put it on. And I was like, whoa. And then it was like, because then what I realized is this mentality is something that's been in tech for ages. And they call it like this fail fast, fail often. If you're thinking that you might fail in something, rocket towards that failure at high speed. That's the best thing that you can do. And I learned this in music as well. I'd forgotten that I'd learned this in music, because I had a guitar teacher who told me, it's like, if you're going to play a wrong note, play it loud. Play it loud and play it proud, because otherwise you won't know. Otherwise you're going to hide your wrong notes. You won't hear them. No one else will hear them either. And then you're just going to keep playing those wrong notes. But you play it loud and proud and everyone knows about it. Have a good laugh about it afterwards. Like, that was not in tune. It's like, no, that was not in tune. And then you go back and you go, okay, that's where I should be playing a different sequence there or something like that, you know? And you go, okay, cool, we can figure this out, no worries. And the best way to kind of long-term avoid failure, so now I'm saying that you can, I guess, in a way, avoid failure, is by rocketing towards it as much as you can. So trying to fail a lot is going to get you to the point where you know so much about failure that it doesn't faze you. You recover really well from it. You learn something from it every time. So that's the thing. So practical advice for developing resilience and developing a good approach to impossible situations and failure is take part in things that you're not good at. So I have this thing that I've been doing over the course of my life where once every sort of 3 to 5 years-ish, I'll take up a new hobby. So my most recent one is painting. I've been painting miniatures. So it's not even canvas painting. It's painting little toys. So I've been building some here, like this Warhammer stuff, and painting them. And so I've spent a few years doing that. And so I basically, in starting a new hobby, I encounter a great deal of failure. Because if you haven't gotten experience with something, then you will fail a lot. And it's a good reminder that failure is all around you, which means that opportunities for learning are all around you all the time. So I'm now in a position where I've gotten pretty good at it, and so I'm quite happy with what I do with it now. So it might be soon it'll be time to take up a hobby, take up a different hobby in order to get myself back into the deep and positive kind of relationship with failure that I like to have. So I think, like, take up something where you can see the failure really easily, but also where it's not a risk, you know? So I guess for some people that is computer science, where it's like, this is a new thing, I'm going to fail heaps in this, but everything that I'm going to do wrong, I'm going to learn from. Because, like, you know, every time your code doesn't compile, if you have a certain outlook on life, you could consider that to be a failure. But if you have a different outlook on life, you consider every time your code doesn't compile, you're learning more about the structure and grammar of C. And you're learning more about compiler errors, so that when big errors come up later, you'll have seen these error messages before and you'll know about them. Whereas if you're someone whose code compiles first time every time, you're kind of a ticking time bomb. Because at some point when it doesn't compile, but it's really, really complicated, you're not going to know how to deal with the problems. So it's nearly better to have failed many, many times in the past than it is to never have failed. So yeah, those kinds of situations. So I think put yourself into situations where failure is inevitable but doesn't cost you. And then you can be like, okay, we're going to learn something from this. Nearly the same situations I was talking about earlier. Play games with people. Play games where if you lose, you don't get salty about it. It's like, that's hard, right? It's hard, but you'll get better at it the more times you lose. If you play games against other people, so I mean, like, I know people were talking about before, someone was talking about MOBAs, right? So any MOBA, no matter how good you are, you're going to end up with about a 50% win rate, because the better you get, the better the game matches. The game matches you up against better people. So it doesn't matter how good you get at a game, you end up with a 50% win rate, which means you get to see your failure 50% of the time, and you get to say, what happened there that brought us into that situation? So you end up hitting impossible situations. Like those of you who are playing like LOL like every night, don't play it every night. There are other games in the world. There are other games that are very, very interesting. I mean, I say this having been someone who played World of Warcraft and no other games for 4 years. So I don't have a leg to stand on when I say that, but I'm saying get some variety. But those of you who go deep into any kind of competitive games, you lose half as many times as you win. And if you reach the top tier and you start to win more times than you lose, then maybe you should go be a pro gamer. Oops, sorry, turn off my phone. Having said that, the pro gamer thing is very, very difficult. It's like big money for a very, very small number of people. Oh, Pat's saying that CSGO matchmaking is rigged. That's unfortunate. I've not played enough CSGO to see the issues in its matchmaking. So anyway, putting yourself in situations where you're regularly going to fail can be quite healthy. You'll learn a lot from it. And especially, I think, a lot of stuff like sports. Sports, games, esports, all similar kind of situation where you're in places where failure is inevitable because the other team's trying to win just as hard as you are. So a 50% win rate is acceptable and fine, which means you learn a lot about losing in that case. But so long as it's like a social thing and you're not pitting your identity and your emotional fulfillment on needing to win. Because once you get into that and you need to win all the time, that's an attitude that's probably going to cost you, because you're going to start being angry at your failures and your losses instead of welcoming your failures and losses as the things that you actually grow from. People rarely grow from winning. People grow from losing. So being a loser is better. Sometimes I like just saying stuff like that, right? Okay. So let's move on. There's other things I want to talk. Oh, look, my face is already in the right place. Okay, so this meme. I love this meme. Let me get my. I'm scaled up a bit too big for it there, but I'm pretty much in the right place. I'm the dude with his cup of coffee sitting there. I mean, like, should drink a little while I've got the cup. This guy's just being a dick. But anyway. Because it's always someone always puts something in here that is like just dumb, controversial, because they're just trying to get it into an argument with people just for the fun of it. But, Jennifer, sorry. Life sim failures, burying 99,000 bells instead of 10k. I know that. I've been there. It's an Animal Crossing thing, everyone. So like, if you bury money, it grows a tree that grows more money, and it grows money based on the amount of money you put in, but 10,000 is the best amount, and if you accidentally put too much money, you still only get 10,000 back. So yeah, I've been there. Anyway, so let's talk about technical skills. So I had the 4 pillars, and I've gone through 3 of them so far. The 4th pillar is your technical skills, right? And I don't really need to talk about that here, because we've got like, this is like 2 hours out of yeah, Jennifer, you don't get a second chance. You get a chance tomorrow, though. I mean, Animal Crossing does give you more chances, but it's just slow. It's also like when you try to get a particular, when you're trying to be really careful to kick someone off your island and kick the right person off your island, so you have to interact with only the right people, and it gets... Anyway, let's not go into detail about how to min-max Animal Crossing, because I think that would be like a whole nother lecture. Sometimes I feel like I should quit my job as a lecturer and just talk about like how to do other things like that. Yeah. So you're living with your mistake for 24 hours. Hey, 24 hours is a short time to live with a mistake. If you, for example, decide that you've got 2 jobs and you're applying for 2 jobs and they both offer you something, and then you take one, and then, you know, later on realize maybe I should have taken the other job, you might be up for like a 2-year roller coaster at that point, where you're like, I don't know whether I should have gone on the other one or not. So, you know, it's tough, right? So yeah, Tawaka, like, let's do a university course on min-maxing gameplay. That's a real thing, by the way. I've done the majority of a PhD on min-maxing gameplay. It's actually that, like, that min-max is not just a term used for people who try to win games. It's an actual game theory, like a theoretical way of analyzing games and doing the best you can in them. I am not going to talk about that just now. So, we're going to talk about your programming skills and your technical skills, in a sense, your ability to sort of carry out the day-to-day bits and pieces of an engineering job or something like that. And I put this last on the list because we're only spending 2 hours talking about all of the other things that make you a professional, and we're going to spend, what do we got, 10 weeks, no, yeah, 10 weeks of 4 hours, or 40 hours. We're spending like 38 hours on that. And in your degree, there's going to be plenty of courses you're going to do which will never touch on the human skills necessary to be a professional programmer. They'll touch on all the technical skills. So you've got plenty of time to learn that. And also, this is the one where it's just your career path will teach you these things, whether you like it or not. And you note that all of the other things that I've been talking about, everything where I've said this is the practical experience about how to get these skills, they've all been outside of the traditional computer science career path. Right. So it's interesting that we teach only one of the 4 pillars at a great detail, and other times we teach the other pillars. So what I'm saying is that this is still important, but it's something that you'll probably get. You know, whether you need it or not, you're going to get it. But the thing that I wanted to point out is that from all my conversations with friends and stuff, and from my experience of building student teams and managing them, the other skills are just as important in terms of in a workplace or something. And you will be hired based on the 4 pillars together, not just the technical one. So remember that a well-rounded education is something that you're aiming for if you want to be a professional engineer, a professional computer scientist. And that well-rounded education means you need to learn things outside of the classroom as well. I can't remember if there's more stuff I wanted to talk about the technical skills. I always kind of like hit this one and go, yeah, you know, that's all I need to say. I don't think I need to say much about it here. Yeah. Oh, Waleed, you've been trying to catch up on sleep this week. You're our 3 a.m. start on the Wednesdays, aren't you? Is it 3 a.m. or 5? It is 3 a.m. Yeah, that's so full on. I think if I had 3 a.m. stuff, I'd end up staying up and doing it, because like I don't think I can't wake up then, but I can stay up till then. Alright, so I did want to talk a little bit more about maybe some practicalities about surviving things, because a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is very focused on maybe a distant future. The idea that you're going to go into a workplace eventually and need to do things. But the resilience thing is about surviving what you're in and being able to approach the problems that are facing you as they happen. So right now, you have problems. Right now, you have an assignment. So there's some horrible, horrible human being has made you do this massive assignment with all this programming in it. And you can see that, like, as much as like some of the stuff is testing what you actually know, some of the stuff is like really, really full on, and they've added these escalation, like everything's escalating, and so if you want to, no matter how good you are, you can always push yourself to try to do too much in this. And so I don't know who that horrible person would be, but yeah. So there's this situation where you need to finish an assignment. So it's like a practical example of this kind of thing, and sometimes I think an attitude we get into a lot of us get into this in all the things we're doing, is this idea of perfectionism. And it's really funny because people talk about perfectionism as a positive trait. It's absolutely not. So people will go, like, they talk about job interviews and they're like, what is your biggest weakness? Well, I'm a perfectionist and stuff. And it's like, well, you're not getting hired now. Because it's a joke, because it used to be this thing of like, how do you say something negative about yourself without saying something negative? And you go, well, I'm a perfectionist, which means I always try to do a good job at the cost of other things. And so yeah, and the cost of other things is the thing that's the biggest problem, and it's why you won't get hired as a perfectionist. Sorry, some people actually are perfectionists, and I know it's something that they struggle with, and it's an attitude you need to work on, because the more that you live in that perfectionist world, the more you are avoiding failure instead of going towards success. So just be careful with that one, right? A lot of people just refer to themselves as perfectionists because it's a fun way to talk about things. I don't think anyone really is, but anyway, I always have to when I slam an ideal or something, I have to remember that there are people with those ideals, and it's much better to coerce people out of those ideals than to yell at them about them. So I was, because I do sometimes, I snoop on what's happening in messenger chats and the Discord and stuff like that, and people trying to get 100% in the assignment, and you can see that I've put a lot of effort into trying to convince people that 100% is not your aim for this. You should prioritize how to get the maximum marks out of the time that you have to spend, rather than trying to get every single mark in the assignment. And this is another lesson. It's a lesson about work, and it's a lesson about life. If you try to 100% everything, you will 0% a whole bunch of things, right? So I think the biggest issue is that if you push too hard, you burn out. And burnout is a thing that we know, because it happens a lot in the tech industry, because people get worked too hard. And this is the idea about Waleed's laughing at me because I said I didn't join messenger chats. I'm not on any of the messenger chats. I'm not any of the Facebooks or anything like that, but I'm on the Discord. So I hear that. And heaps of my tutors are X1511 students, because it's basically impossible to be an X1511 student, to be a tutor and not have been a 1511 student. So a lot of them are still on the messenger chats, so every now and then they'll send a few tasty morsels my way, just to be like, hey, people are saying this. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's like, I can't be part of the conversation, but every now and then someone will just relay something and just go, hey, people are wanting to do this. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll add something into my teaching to let people know that they don't need to take pressure on from that kind of thing. So a lot of that stuff that I do, a lot of people are taking on the pressure of like trying to get 100% in the assignment, and thinking of having the perspective that you start at 100% and anything you don't get is like negative 100%, and that's really bad, right? Because if we get into that attitude, all we think about is we're losing marks, instead of thinking about all the work we put in is gaining us marks. Jennifer, I have heard about the Google form. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. That one got escalated to me because the tutors were like, because this wasn't on the course forum, right? So then it's official if it's on the course forum. And so they escalated to me because they said, Mark, I think we need you to make the call about whether this is right or not. A lot of the time I trust my tutors to make the call on things, but this was like, oh, we haven't seen anything like this. Do you think this is a problem? It's like, no, it's not a problem. Like, all we needed to say about that particular Google form, Jennifer is making a Google form that collects stats from everyone. So everyone's voluntarily putting in stats saying, how many functions did I write? How many lines of code did I write and stuff? So you can kind of build a graph afterwards about like the way that different people approached the assignment and get a statistical outlook on it. So I think it's anonymous and statistical. The only thing that I said was like, it's not going to be official because we're not running it. So we can't say that these are the actual statistics. We can see that these are the collected statistics, and they have a definite bias towards who wanted to fill out the form. And so you're definitely going to get a bias towards anyone who wants to fill out the form is potentially more going to be people showing off about what they did than people who think that their code is bad. So if people think their code is bad, they're less likely to fill out the form. So watch out for that bias, but otherwise I think it's an interesting thing to look at. Anyway, getting sidetracked. I said that this wouldn't take 2 hours, this talk, but it will now because we're already getting close to it. So, sorry. Oh, I was going to turn the light on, but I haven't got it plugged in right. Anyway, so prioritizing how you can get the most out of the work that you can do is super, super important. Because this is how you're going to have to work as a professional. Generally, when we work as professionals, a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, our managers are going to say to us, we would like to get the best work we can out of you. And sometimes the best work we can get out of you means we just give you a lot of work and then you focus on the things that you can handle, right? In which case, if you try to 100% everything, you will not be able to survive this, you know, and you will hit what we call burnout. And so let's take this assignment as an example. So most people, I'm thinking 90% at least of the course, even more than 90% of the course, are not even aiming at trying to get 100%. Some people are aiming to get 100%, and only some of them will actually get 100%, right? Because you never know. You never know. You can push as hard as you can, but there's things you haven't thought of, and that's where you learn. So, how do we prioritize the assignment to get the most marks? Instead of just trying to 100% it, what you do is you look at how many marks each part of the assignment is worth. It's very, very asymmetric, right? So, Waleed's laughing at me because Tom finished his talk yesterday exactly on time. I don't do that. I waffle. But I like to consider my waffling to be interesting, so it's okay. So, trying to complete every part of the assignment is not quite as good as looking at which parts of the assignment score the most marks for the least amount of effort. And we have specifically set up the assignment that way. So people look at the extension section. Getting perfect code style is worth roughly, it's not exactly, but worth roughly as much as the entire extension section. So, and I know one of them is way easier than the other. So you can see why, and stage 1 is worth, what is it? Stage 1 is worth nearly 3 times as much as the entire extension. So just stage 1, I think. More than 3 times as much as the entire extension. So you get this kind of thing where if you see where the marks are, then you work on those things. And this is really easy at university because it's literally marks for time. But when you get into the workplace, it's different. You start to think about what are the goals of our project and how do we meet those goals of the project with the minimum amount of work so that we can actually have time to do things in a clear way and do things well. And so what I'm trying to push you towards is this idea that when you get given things that appear to be impossible, again, you know, this is the same thread going through a lot of things I'm talking about here. How do you get the most out of this so that you can complete the things that you think are most important? We make it easy for you at the moment with a judgment on what's most important is something that we have made. And if you have a good manager, they will make that judgment for you. I was talking about my partner, she knows how to do that kind of thing. While you're getting close to a deadline, she will just chop off parts of the project and be like, that's not going to make it to the deadline. That's the first patch. So stop working on it because it's not as important as this other thing. This other thing is important. This thing has to go day 1. This thing can go, day 30 or something, and we'll get away with it. Again, people who play a lot of computer games will know this because we know that some things hit the release of a game and some things have to get pushed back and delayed because the release date on computer games is based on when they will sell well, not when they're finished. And so a lot of the time we have to hit this point where we hit the finish with what we've got. It has to be the best that we can do at that point in time, but we can shape what we do in the lead up to that to get something good happening, and crucial things aren't missing, but add-on bits are missing. Again, I learned this more in theatre than I learned in anything else, because they have this saying in theatre that the show must go on. So I remember, I think it was one of the reviews, that the audience was outside in the foyer, and so we were within 10 minutes of going on stage, and I was in the roof with a drill trying to reconstruct something so that we could get a particular like projector rig working. And I was looking at the clock, and the producer is in my ear going, when can I open the doors? We need to put people in the seats. And then at some point I had to be like, well, we're running without this thing. And nothing teaches you about, prioritizing your time like having something like that happen. And so what I really should have been doing in that time was preparing all the important bits of the show, and what I should have done is abandoned that piece of work and said, there's a whole day between the end of this show and the start of the next show. That thing can get done then. It's like a 2-hour job. There was no point doing it then. And so it's really interesting, and what I should have been doing with that time was like, actually prepping what the flow of the show is going to be, make sure the narrative is going to carry forward and all this kind of stuff. I was a technical person at that point, but we do the timing of the show as it happens, right? And so I want to get everyone into that way of thinking as well, where it's not about everything, it's about effectiveness, right? So, obligatory Drake meme, I want to be the happy one. Hey. So, I've had this situation happen before, where I had a student who was a very good at programming, but I don't want to say a very good student, because they kept doing the top one. They kept basically picking the hardest way they could possibly do something, and I don't know why they were doing it. I mean, part of me, the cynical part of me, thought that they were trying to show off that they were better than other students or something, and so they pick really difficult ways of doing things and say, oh, I'm going to do this the hard way or something. And then they work on it like crazy, and then they wouldn't make it to the deadline. And so what they would have at the deadline is an unfinished, highly ambitious project. And then I'd see other students who didn't have that mindset be like, here's my half-finished, but stage complete in the early stages of thing, and I'd be like, yeah, you're gonna pass, you're fine, and the other person, the top person, had put in all this extra work and burnt out and not handed anything in. That person just started failing everything, and it was really kind of sad, because like I talked to them a lot. Like, this is when I was working one-on-one with students a lot more, and I talked to them a lot, and I was like, I don't always need you to have this amazing imagination. I don't always need you to show me that you can, download research papers and re-implement algorithms from research papers. Like, what I need is for you to actually survive this course, because the way you're going now, I don't think you will, So it's about trying to figure out, you've got a certain amount of time left, and that time always creeps forward. At the moment, you have very, very little amount of time left, because CSE is going to turn off their servers any second now. Someone's saying that the servers might already be off. Someone's saying VLab is off. I don't know. I haven't tried. Obviously, I've been talking for the last 2 hours, so I haven't tried. So, figure out which bits of your problem you can solve to get the most out of it. Do that. Aim for what gets you something decent. And get enough to make yourself happy with what you're doing, rather than working like crazy and then not finishing. So there's another saying that I'm going to repeat, which is finished is better than good. Because if you aim for amazing and you don't finish, it means you haven't created anything. But if you aim for something that you can complete and you go, okay, maybe we'll make it good later, then at least you've completed something. And your assignments are like that as well, which is why they're in stages. You should complete each stage before you move on to the next stage. I mean, like, some of the stages are impossible if you haven't completed the previous stages. So what we're doing is we're trying to teach you that lesson. Building things up in steps that all work is the way to do it. Someone saying that some of SSH is still working. SAP doesn't seem to be working. So I think that maybe things are happening earlier. Like 7 p.m. was the official time, but I guess some of the systems, also because this is a UNSW thing where they're going to cut off the power to the whole building, so maybe this is a staging. Things are getting turned off bit by bit. I thought that they weren't going to start turning things off by 7, but it might be at 7 everything is off and they've already started turning some things off. But anyway, so I just want to talk about this kind of attitude where it's like, you can practice this in your assignments. Aim for the bits that make you happy with the work you've done. But if you push so hard that all you are is unhappy about the assignment, unhappy about the university and the way that you're working on it, you've pushed yourself into a situation where you're not going to be learning anymore, and you're not going to be able to handle what's going on. So when you're debugging things, you can't find the bugs, when you can't find the solution to a stage, this step is actually the most important. Take a moment to breathe. Just back off, go for a walk, have a nap, take a shower or something. There's so many things that you can do that will give you a mental reset. They'll give you a chance for your brain to go, okay, I don't have to deal with this. This is not a problem that has to be with me 24/7. And then you kind of start to reset, and then you chill out, and then you start to be able to rationally approach your problem by breaking it down into pieces, one piece at a time, and get yourself to a point where you can target your assignments knowing where you're at. It's very much harder in first year because you're in a new situation here at university. So you don't know where the goalposts are. You don't know what the field looks like. Using another sport analogy, right? I know a lot of students, when they get to like the second year, third year, they go, this is my kind of wham. I had the same thing. I always had a mark that I got if I was paying a medium amount of attention to the subject. I think it was like 72 or something. And I was like, okay, subjects I don't care too much about, subjects that I'm just working on, I know I need to get through, I'm going to get that same mark, 72. And then I had the 84, which is the subjects I liked and the subjects that I wanted to do work in and stuff. I'd get 84. There's nothing more psychologically debilitating than getting like 6 84s on your transcript and just going, oh my god, I could have been an HD student, but I'm not. I'm just a very, very close to, but not quite HD student. That was like a lot of my transcript. So I learned a lot about dealing with what I perceived as failure, but then later on realized was not failure at all. Mark of 84 is very, very high in any subject, and it's actually a very good thing. But learning how to figure out that you're not going to get 100%, and you're not even trying to get 100%, but going for the marks that make sense for you to go for, so that you learn something valuable and you're happy with what you've done, and so that you're psychologically capable to take on the next challenge, as opposed to going all in on one challenge and then failing, and then you leave yourself psychologically in a position where you're just not prepared to take on any further challenge other than that. So, a question here. If I'm talking about becoming a professional, and I'm talking about what you need to do to learn to become a professional, and all the skills you can build up, and me kind of saying in a lot of this talk that you need things to be a professional, I now have this question: who can become a professional? And the answer is you. I always love this part of this talk because it's really, really important, but it's something that I love to be able to say. The answer is you. The answer is me. The answer is everyone else in the computing industry. There are so many situations. Where you could be led to believe that you don't have a place there. Some of these are hideously malicious. Some of these are people who are holding positions of power and trying to keep certain types of people out. Our world has no place for those people. Our world has no place for people who for no good reason, are trying to keep other people out of things. So that's a side issue. It's not even what I was going to talk about this slide, but it's super important. I say side issue, but it's like one of the biggest issues causing like conflict for humans is disrespect for other humans. But I think one thing that's interesting that people think that those people who are already in the industry, people working as professional software engineers and stuff like that, have just got it all sorted. People like a lot of students look at me and just go, "Oh, Mark Chi knows exactly what he's talking about. He's like." He knows all this code inside out, and he knows how to deliver all these lectures and stuff, and so he must have everything sorted. And it's like, God, you just one peek behind the veil, and you'll see the absolute mess of a human being that's actually delivering all this stuff. I can keep it up for 4 hours a week. I'm very, very good at keeping up for 4 hours a week. And at other times, I'm just like, what is going on? Or like, why did I say that in the lecture? Like sometimes I'll say something, and then afterwards go, that was wrong. I've just sent hundreds of people off in a direction which is the wrong way to learn that thing. And it's really like the idea that it really does happen that no one really knows what they're doing. We're all just kind of figuring it out as we go. I've made revisions to the lectures this term to things that I'm teaching. They're subtle, but some of them are actually quite important. And some of them are fundamental programming things that I got wrong. And I misunderstood, and I taught wrong for the previous 4,000 students that went through COMP1511 over the last 2 years. And I only fixed it for this term. And I'm like, wow, if I wanted to, I could really beat myself up over this. But I think it's important to understand that we don't know what we're doing. And it's better to understand that everyone doesn't know what they're doing than to think that everyone else knows what they're doing, and then you go from your own experience and you go, I don't know what I'm doing, but it looks like everyone else knows what they're doing. That's this thing called imposter syndrome, and it's huge, and nearly everyone gets it, and it's a thing that like would make us take ourselves out of situations that we could otherwise thrive in, just because we think that we're not. Like the imposter syndrome, the definition of it is, we think that we're the imposter, that everyone else knows what they're doing, and we're the only one that doesn't know what they're doing. And we have this fear that eventually someone else is going to find out that we don't know what we're doing, and then we're going to lose our job or lose our position or something like that. When the truth is, everyone has the same fear. Because everyone doesn't know what they're doing. Some people are just better at hiding it, and some people don't like to talk about it. Some people on the surface don't look like they're making mistakes, but they're making mistakes and they're just not telling anyone about it. Or they're entirely lying to themselves and they think that they're successful, but what they really are is that obnoxious person that keeps keeps saying that they're okay, and everyone else is like, can you just please not be okay just for once so that we can all be human? So what I want to say to everyone is, if you choose this, if you choose to be a computing professional, and a significant number of you have preliminarily made this choice because you've enrolled in the degree, that doesn't mean you've committed to it as a career. That just means that the first year of your degree at the moment is computing. Second year of your degree might be like, I don't know, you might have a wish elsewhere, and so the second year you go, no, I'm going to go do mathematics instead because I did better in those subjects and I appreciated them more. So you cross over and you do something else, like there's a lot of stuff like that. You could do a gen ed in something and go, wow, I really love this kind of art history thing that I saw, and I realized that there's a calling there for me, and you jump, right? Totally fine. Especially if you jump with computing knowledge. Maybe art history could use a computing professional to bring some new way of thinking there. There's a lot of value in that kind of thing. But where was I going with that? Sorry, I've derailed myself. But I think the key that I'm trying to talk about with this is that it doesn't have to be on a set path, and you don't have to say, look at your marks or anything and say, like, I'm not worthy of this. If you decide you want something and you decide that you're going to commit to something, then it is only time that it takes to get there. That is the only thing that is going to to decide when you get there. Is how much time you have to commit to it. And I do fully acknowledge that different people take a different amount of time to do things. Some people would say that you should try lots and lots of different disciplines. So you should go and do a whole bunch of different subjects in different parts of the university and see which one is the easiest for you, and then do that. But I don't know if that's always the case, because doing something that's easy for you, yes, kind of means that you're going to have a bit more success. But sometimes it also means that you'll pick something that you're good at, not something that you like. So that's that kind of thing. You choose something that's going to fulfill you. If you think computing is going to fulfill you, then give it a shot. But the trick is to commit to it and know that the whole way through you're going to think you don't know stuff, because the more you learn about things, generally the more you find out that you don't know things. So all you need to do is commit. And if you do, understand that it takes time. Because you could commit and then just start failing subjects. But if you fail subjects and you come back and go, look, that was half the time I needed to spend on that subject. Now I've got another half of that time. Maybe I'll do okay this time. So things like that can happen. So what I'm saying is, it's never up to someone else whether you can do something or not. It's up to you and the amount of time you want to spend on it. And know that we're always our worst critic, but don't write yourself off, because the rest of us don't know what we're doing either. And if you ever have an honest conversation with people who are even like highly successful individuals running tech companies and stuff like that, they'll probably say to you, no, I just made up a lot of stuff as I went along, and the only reason this company is still going is we were very lucky. You know, we hit a certain part of the market at the right time, and we happened to make the right decisions. When we made those decisions, we didn't know they were the right decisions. Now, in hindsight, we can look back and we can make those decisions better again, but we happened to make the right thing at the time, and that's how it is. So, this is kind of what I was saying there, but let me put myself down here. We're always going to keep learning. It's not something that's like, becoming a professional is not something you flick a switch and you weren't a professional before and you are a professional after. It's an ongoing thing. You get better at doing these skills the more you do them. So the 4 pillars, remember them. Remember to communicate. Remember to always think about communicating with people who aren't computing professionals, because that's quite valuable. Remember that when you're on a team, you work for other people and you work with other people. You know, so you're not always leading and you're not always following, and you have to be able to do them all. Always look after yourself, always care about yourself. Remember that if you're not caring for yourself, chances are people around you may not. You know, like, it's hard for other people too. And then the one thing that I like to say always about being a professional and just sort of living in this world in general is take care of yourself and always care. Care about the work that you do and why you're doing it. Care about the people around you and what happens to them, and care about yourself and look after yourself and as other people and the things that you want to do. And that's the recipe for ending up in a life where you're fulfilled with what you're doing. Because personally, I think fulfillment comes from doing things that you care about and learning from doing the things that you care about, and also being amongst people who also care. And the only way to get people around you who care about their work and to care about each other is you start caring about them. So that is my my talk on life in general, and what it can mean for you to, I guess, try to go beyond just learning how to program a computer and learn how you want to live in a career as such. Like, how do you want to kind of secure work, do good work, and be happy about it. So I've gone a little bit over time. I've gone 3 minutes over time. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you everyone who came along, and also a hello to anyone who watches this after the fact. I do understand that this particular Friday afternoon was very, very hard for a lot of people to come along to, because it's right in the middle of a assignment deadline, as well as the computer's about to shut down for the week. But I still wanted to give the message during this time frame, and people can watch it afterwards. So thank you all. I will see you next Wednesday, and we will be back to our regular programming and stuff like that then. Alright. Thanks all. Goodbye.